Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Please join our experienced and knowledgeable panel of hosts as we explore the great mysteries of our time: Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and unexplained phenomena.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Tonight, Mike and I are joined, and very glad to be joined, by UFO historian William Pullin. William, welcome to our show. Thank you very much for being here.
Adam, thanks for having me on. How are you, sir?
Very well, and I'm very genuinely interested in a lot of your approach to the subject. And that's going to be one of the things that we focus on at the start of the show. So, to set the scene, one of the things that it seems to me you're very keen on talking about is being objectively skeptical. What does that mean in the context of both your research and in terms of ufology generally?
Well, in the history of the phenomenon, every legitimate investigative effort, whether done by an individual, say Dr. Hynek or James McDonald or Kevin Randall, or by different groups, whether they're civilian or military, that usually aren't affiliated with the U.S. government, tend to come to the conclusion that only about 5 to 10% of these sightings are unexplainable, which to my mind means that 90 to 95% of them are explainable. They are mundane in form. So when I hear about a sighting, I'm cautious, skeptical until I examine the data. And the objective angle of it is that, as with a law enforcement official or an archaeologist or a scientist, you can't enter an investigation with any kind of bias. You have to go where the data leads you. Whether or not that leads or proves your theory or not, it's the process that's important. So having a lack of a bias and just go where the data shows you and go in that direction is more important than trying to confirm one's own belief structure. And I learned that in my university studies here in Texas, that it's all about the data and not about beliefs. What can we prove as opposed to what we believe? So I apply that to the UFO field and the topic pretty dogmatically.
So you were a mechanical engineer. You studied mechanical engineering, is that right?
I did, although I never practiced. I got my degree, but I've been a tennis coach for years, but I never used my degree. No.
But that scientific degree you had. I mean, I in my house in London when I went to university there were 3 mech engineers in there, and it's not an easy degree. It requires a lot of work and a lot of scientific discipline. Do you apply the scientific methodology you learned as part of your degree to analyzing UFO data?
Yes, yeah, that's my approach. I use that exclusively, but also with the understanding that science can't explain everything either. So, but I go with my talents. Yeah.
So because this is for me, this is an interesting point when we're looking at this, because one of the things I have thought about myself with the UFO topic is how do you do this analysis? So when we're looking at this, and bearing in mind your background, I know you didn't practice, but you did a degree. How do you objectively quantify something like UFO data? How do you even begin?
Well, I mean, you've got documentation that needs to be vetted, and a lot of times you look at the sighting report, whether it's in the field or not, or whether it's historical data. I'm very comfortable seeking out individuals that I know in the community that have a knowledge that I don't. They have a specific discipline that I don't. They have military service, or they have an educational background that is not specific to, say, engineering, some other point of view, and then also take into account whether an individual that I'm seeking knowledge from is experienced or not, whether they're a UFO witness or not, because there's certainly a point of view to be drawn from that also. When I get a sighting report from an individual, face-to-face or through an email. Usually those sighting reports are relatively close to my area. I live in San Antonio, Texas. The first step is just to try to validate whether an event took place or not, and then go from there. But it's very time-consuming. It's very boring, the work, and a lot of times it's not very rewarding because a lot of cases are just explainable.
So one of the things that I think that you're concerned about is a lack of critical thinking. Can you give me an example of where you've applied critical thinking to an eyewitness or report, and where somebody may well have demonstrably not applied that? You don't have to name names, but I want people to understand the variances in approach that you propagate.
Well, for example, if I get a sighting report and an individual claims they saw a series of lights in the sky and no sound, no discernible movement, no influence on the environment, and go with that, I'm fully aware that people do misidentify things. People are not the best observers, per se. You could ask any police officer after a car wreck. They can talk to 10 different witnesses and get 10 different descriptions of what just transpired. So I take that into consideration. And then the other angle is trying to find physical evidence to back up the testimony. It's a very long-winded process. But that's about the only way you can approach the topic, because if we make unsubstantiated comments and we have beliefs that aren't supported at all by any evidence, they're just ideas. I need evidence. I need data. I need something tangible to wrap my head around. But that's my own professional approach. Other researchers don't have that same approach.
And what I'm not asking again. I'm very specific. I don't want you to name names. But what sort of approaches have you seen in the past that you might think are not appropriate? Just so we can see the differences.
When, let's say, a researcher or an author has a lecture or presents a book or a documentary that is very randomly speculative, there's no evidence to back up their claims. Their claims are not borne out by observation. Let's say I saw a claim a few days ago that there are dozens of alien species visiting the Earth.
Right.
And this claim was made by a researcher. I don't know how you prove that. The data does not support that at all. That's that kind of thinking where it's a belief, but can we prove that? We can't prove that at this point. So that's that lack of critical thinking I'm talking about.
Okay. So on that point, we can't prove that there are dozens of alien. Not prove. That's the wrong word, I think. We can't make an assertion or a hypothesis that there are dozens of alien species visiting Earth. Can we make an assertion that some are? And if so, how? Yes.
The data, the UFO sightings we have, and there are tens of thousands on the books, and the ones that have been validated and remain unexplained, the data strongly suggests that we are being visited. By whom? We don't know. Where are they coming from? We don't know. Why are they coming here? We don't know. But the data strongly suggests that they are coming here. As to how many species, I have no idea. I don't know. I'm very comfortable saying I don't know. But the data does show that. The data does not show we're being visited by, say, 40 species. It's just, it goes back to the data.
No, that's fine. I mean, I like the fact that you say you don't know, because too many people are very uncomfortable saying I don't know.
Yes.
So I'm good with that. Excellent. So the third point in this, if you like, this triad of questions I had around data, was when you often talk, when I've been listening to you about disclosure. When we talk about personal disclosure or government disclosure, can you explain the differences between them, and then I'll probably ask you a question about that.
I guess my professional definition of a disclosure is kind of the same as my personal one. The idea that the government or the military would open up their files and release everything they've gathered over the last 70 years, be it documentation of events, any physical evidence, any organic material recovered, and open it up for the public to examine, for all of us to examine. I just don't think that'll ever happen because it's certainly not politically advantageous for the government to do that. They would have to explain why they haven't done it at this point, till this point. I would love to be proven wrong. I just don't think it's going to happen. Now, through research and some recent developments, the fact that the Navy is a little more open talking about this topic, that's kind of a roundabout disclosure, but it's not a wide open disclosure. They're disclosing that something unidentified is being seen, but they're not really disclosing the data that they have. So it's kind of in that direction, but it's not a full disclosure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because I've certainly seen a softening of approach. To the best of my knowledge, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on this subject, but the Navy released those recent, which you must know about, released the recent videos of the UFOs, and the pilots that were chasing them basically said they're UFOs and they were experienced pilots. I was surprised that they released them. Were you surprised, William?
I kind of was. I was more surprised that they were open about it.
Yeah.
That they were allowing their pilots to discuss this openly. They weren't attempting to belittle the importance of it. So it was refreshing, as opposed to the way it's been the last few decades, where they just don't give us anything. So, and these pilots are trained observers, so those sightings are of a high quality, and you have physical evidence, the videos, to corroborate their testimony. So I was happy about the fact that they've loosened up a little bit and they're giving us something.
So you don't think government disclosure? I mean, I know you want to be proven wrong. You've got no ego about it. I know that. But do you think that there is a possibility that they might be able to be working towards a gradual disclosure, and this might be a stepping point? This sort of softening, this allowing pilots to publicly speculate that they've seen a tangible UFO, or do you just think it's a random thing that the Navy does?
I don't know at this point. I'll be interested to see if the other branches of the military end up getting more open to the topic like the Navy is right now. Having said that, I think what seems to be happening is a softening of the approach. They're a little more open discussing this with the public, with civilians. They're not hiding things the way they were, say, in the 1960s. So, having said that, I guess it's kind of a slow, gradual disclosure. I don't know if it'll end up being a complete disclosure, but they're certainly getting to the point where they're much more open talking about it with non-military personnel, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing for researchers and lay people alike.
I'll tell you, I mean, sometimes you can link 2 and 2 and make 5, and this could be an instance of it. But I'll tell you what struck me when I saw those was the point that whatever you think about Bob Lazar, and we can come on to that later, he made a point in one of his videos which I watched, and he said, well, I was paid by the Navy or Naval Intelligence. I don't know why I was, but I was paid by them. And it seems to me, again, when I look at this and analyse it, the Navy seems to be the leading branch of the armed services in connection with this matter, not so much the Air Force. Is my hypothesis right or total rubbish? And again, I don't mind if you tell me it's total rubbish. I'm just thinking out loud, really, William. There's just a thought that's popped into my head.
I'm kind of the same opinion. The Air Force was originally the Army Air Corps. When it became the Air Force back in 1947, the Air Force kind of took the bull by the horns, and they were controlling or they were perceived to be controlling the investigative efforts being conducted by the military into this topic. Since then, it seems that the Navy is a lot more involved than the Air Force at this point. But that's now we're sharing the same opinion, but we're civilians, so we might be wrong about this, or we might be right. It remains to be seen. But the Navy certainly has its hand in the cookie jar. They're very involved with this topic at this point, and I'm with you. It seems like they're more heavily involved in this point. At this point, they're more heavily involved than the Air Force is.
Yeah, I think, again, we're speculating, but it's fun to speculate sometimes. A lot of the underwater UFOs and a lot of those, they would probably be able to quantify more data with their sonar and submarine technology, possibly than any of the other branches. Is that a reasonable assertion, or is that just something that doesn't bear fruit?
That could bear fruit. Certainly, the Navy's operations are much more. Their operations occur in water. They're controlling the seas, so it makes sense that their apparatus they're using to guard our country, guard the shorelines. Their military personnel, whether they're in subs or surface aircraft, would be in a position to detect unidentified objects in the water, much more so than, say, land-based Army operations or air-based Air Force operations. So that's a logical assumption. I tend to agree with that.
Yeah, and I am very interested in this. So when we talk about disclosure, so you think it's very unlikely that the government will be doing this. Do you think there's any sort of political pressure that might persuade them otherwise?
That's a great question. I was actually discussing this with a friend, a fellow researcher who's a Canadian, and he felt it would take an event to precipitate or change. And I tend to agree with that. An event, say a crash of an extraterrestrial object in, say, downtown Denver or Montreal or Paris, something that couldn't be covered up, something that was so in your face that they would have to disclose. I think that's what it would take. Would public pressure or lobbying do the job in the government in Washington, D.C.? I just don't think so at this point. But again, I hope I'm wrong, but I think it would take a large event that they could not deny or cover up for them to be forced to admit and disclose what they have.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've noticed as well when I look at this is that they've been open about the fact that Congress, have had a committee which looks at this and investigates it, and they've been very open about saying, well, we spent millions of dollars about this. You've got the Space Force being created in a very nice and respectful way. I hope you're wrong too, because it would be excellent if they actually reveal their knowledge. And I can understand, tell me if you think I'm wrong, but if I had been in the U.S. government, especially during the 40s, and we found technology, I would have kept it secret because it was a dark time and there was a very real threat from a very dangerous enemy of a totalitarian nature. So that technological edge would have been extremely important. But times have changed and people seem to be more receptive. We never used to think, when I was a child, we never used to think that there was water, in the universe. We were taught that it was arid. And now we know, for example, that there's lots of water in the universe. There's lots of Goldilocks zone ideal planets, far more than we ever before. And the point about critical thinking that I'd make to you is that we've seen this transition away from the fact that we are a sort of very nihilistic yet arrogant idea that we are the only species that could possibly be intelligent life in the universe, to most scientists saying, well, there is life in the universe. There is probably even intelligent life. The question is, where is it? What do you say about that?
I agree. Certainly the thought processes of scientists and civilians alike has gone from we're the only intelligent species in the universe, which is preposterous, really, when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's done a full change. Now we are comfortable thinking about the possibilities of multiple advanced civilizations out there in the universe. The question is, have they visited us? Have they come here? So that I agree. That has certainly changed. That's done a full 180, and it's like night and day. When you talk about the reasons for an early cover-up, reasons to not disclose what the government or the military was covering up or may have recovered, I bring up the Roswell event. If the Roswell event was truly anomalous, if something anomalous crashed there in July 47, the political climate made it imperative to cover that up. We wouldn't want the Soviets or our enemy at the time, our prime enemy, to have recovered any of that advanced technology. That would have upset the balance of power on the planet Earth.
Yeah.
So it made sense. It was logical to cover it up. Now that's changed. The Cold War is done. There's still threats, but there's not one arch enemy of the United States anymore. There are smaller threats that are legitimate nonetheless, but the situation's changed from 7 years ago.
Yeah, I think so. I think we can be a little bit more optimistic, I hope. One of the other points I felt was important is, before there's something I want to talk to you about eyewitnesses, but before we go on to that point, one of the big phenomenon, if you like, and forgive me for asking this question, but I've not asked you, I'm sure you've discussed it a lot, was this whole business of Storm Area 51. How did you feel about that when it came out?
I was troubled by it on several levels. One was the idea of civilians storming a military facility that is being guarded by armed troops.
Yeah,
invites trouble. It could have gone very badly. It could have. It didn't. It didn't pan out that way, which is good. But lives could have been lost. On the other side of the coin, from the way the UFO community is perceived by the general public, it precipitated. It continued this perception that the UFO community is a bunch of kooks. It wasn't taken seriously. It was a story that was laughed at. It was taken tongue in cheek by news outlets everywhere, and so in that way, it was kind of a little bit slightly embarrassing. This idea to gather up several thousand people and storm Area 51. I was very troubled by the whole scenario. Thankfully, it just went by the wayside. It didn't pan out. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was injured. So now it's kind of done, and I think that it worked out for the best.
Yeah, and one of the, there was a couple of points I wanted to bring to your attention. One of them was, we were lucky. People have been shot at Area 51. They've been shot for going in there. It's a military base. Any country will guard their military bases. I've been to that area. I've been to where Area 51 starts, but you know what? I didn't cross the border line because I'm not an idiot. It would have been
you are wise.
Ridiculous.
That's two of us, yeah.
Yeah, it would have been ridiculous to do that. So that's it. And the other point is, and I just speculate this, but this is common knowledge. There's nothing really on the surface at any of these military bases that is of interest. So even if the people had, in the very unlikely event, got into that base, which is vast, there's nothing on the surface anyway, because we don't want our enemies to look at it through satellites. So they wouldn't find anything.
If they gained access to the base and they were actually on the grounds, would they have been able to gain access to the underground parts of the facility? No, not at all. No, it would be unreasonable. That wasn't thought of. That wasn't, the whole scenario wasn't thought through. You can't just go into a base and expect them not to defend the base. And two, once you're on the base, can you get to the interesting stuff? No, it was doomed to fail for the start, and thankfully nobody was hurt.
Yeah, that's the point. Thankfully nobody was hurt. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the other main points that I wanted to cover that is personal to you about this subject, that I was impressed about actually, was that you take it seriously. You don't want to make light of the subject, because these can be traumatic incidents for people, and people are very quick to make fun. Can you articulate your position in relation to this matter? Give me some quantification. What does that mean?
I take the UFO topic very seriously. I hold myself to a high standard of professionalism. I come from the angle of someone who has never seen a UFO. I've never experienced anything anomalous. But having said that, it would never occur to me to belittle or make fun of anyone else's experience. People are seeing and experiencing things they can't explain. It's traumatic. It's emotional. and it's disturbing on many levels. These individuals want to talk to somebody. They want to get off their chest. They want to know they're not going crazy. They want they want a platform to discuss their experiences, whether with other experiencers or with the researchers or both. And everyone, regardless of your point of view, does deserve common courtesy, common respect. And if experiencers, UFO witnesses, are treated with respect, they're far more likely to want to discuss their sighting. If they're belittled or ridiculed, they're going to clam up. They won't give us any kind of evidence. They won't give us any testimony. And in the UFO field, we've always been aware that, from a researcher standpoint, that the majority of UFO witnesses don't report their sightings. So that's very troubling and problematic because we're working with an incomplete slate of data. We don't have all the data that's available to us because most witnesses aren't talking about their sightings. If we could treat them with respect and come off as professional and cordial, then more people would come forward with what they've seen, and they might help us come to at least some answers as to what's going on. We're not there yet. So that's why I take a very professional, serious approach to the issue, because I think that's what it demands.
Have you ever encountered any witnesses who you felt have been traumatized by the actions of individuals when they've explained what's happened to them, even more so than the event themselves?
A few, not many. I can think of maybe 8 or 9 offhand in the last 30 years that had been left with a bad taste in their mouth. They had interacted with another group or another researcher, and they weren't taken seriously. They were not laughed out of court per se, but they clearly felt uncomfortable discussing their event with that person or that group. And they ended up coming to me and are finding out about me, whether through Facebook or what other platforms, and discussing things with me. And I'm very cordial. I'm a great listener. I want to hear about their event and chronicle everything. And all of those witnesses clearly seemed to be more comfortable discussing things with me because I had a deadpan, serious look on my face because I wanted to find out and listen to their event. I would never make light of their event. But of those, they clearly were troubled by the way they were treated by other individuals. I don't know who those individuals are, but that does happen in the field even to this day. Even nowadays, witnesses are not treated the way they should be all the time, and there's definitely a huge problem in this field.
It's an extraordinarily difficult thing to talk about. This interview isn't about me, but I had something very unpleasant happen to me, and together with another guy, very traumatic. But the incident, what we also got was a huge amount of ridicule. And, we were saying if this was a traumatic incident in any other sphere, then people wouldn't dare. It would be totally inappropriate. But because it's so outside people's understanding, they feel it's quite okay to poke fun and ridicule. I'm glad that you're sensitive to that. That's a good approach. Go on, carry on.
No, I literally find no humor in the UFO topic. It's a serious topic. I just can't understand why someone would make light of this topic. Worse yet, why anybody would make light of somebody who's experienced it. I just find that a little professionally embarrassing. That people would find that they would feel it's okay to treat someone like that. I can't wrap my head around that.
Okay. When we're looking at this now, I mean, one of the things I might say skeptical, and it's totally right, is that many of these UFOs that people see are in fact military craft. You can look, for example, at the spy planes like the Blackbird and think, well, 20 years before that, they were kept secret for 20 years. We've got stealth technology, and for very good reasons, the military don't release their latest technology or resources, again, because they want that edge with perceived enemies. What would you say about that?
I would agree. A lot of UFOs potentially could be military apparatus we're not aware of. As civilians, we're not privy to that.
Yeah.
even military personnel aren't. It's a very limited amount of people that actually have knowledge of these technologies that are being developed. So, if by the strict definition of the word, if we see a military aircraft we're unaware of, we can't identify it. That's a UFO. And so I think that certainly does happen relatively often, because there are a lot of UFO sightings that can be somewhat connected to the area of military bases, and military bases who may be testing apparatus, and if civilians see those things, they're seeing things they can identify. So I think that's definitely part of it.
Well, the question is, I don't expect any of the answer to this, but I'm going to put it to you because, it's something that interested me. Is there any methodology, bearing in mind that critical thinking, that you would suggest if somebody sees something unusual in the sky, what sort of methodology should they approach to make any discernment of whether that's something tangible or intangible in terms of potential UFO?
Well, I always advocate that a witness should write down their event and all the details of the event as soon as possible before their memories change or fail. Write down every single detail as soon as possible. Chronicle everything as quickly as possible. I can't stress that enough. And then process what happened. What did you see? What did you not see? Did you hear anything? What were the colors like? What were the weather conditions? Are you near a military base? Are you near a civilian airport? Is there air traffic in your area? Are there migrating birds? All these different scenarios, all these different factors need to be taken into account before we jump to the alien, which is still potentially an explanation. But we need to be critical and think, okay, most of these things are explainable, which means that most things can be reasonably explained by things that are terrestrial in nature, everyday things that are simply misidentified. And if we go through that list, especially from a researcher standpoint, if alien is if extraterrestrial is still on the table after investigation, that's an important case. But if a witness can just write things down quickly, that goes a long, long way.
And is there any particular anomalous features that you would suggest that might be persuasive, or by the same token, is there things that you could easily dismiss, for example, Venus?
Yeah, that happens a lot. Astronomical anomalies or planets, stars, comets, those are misidentified often. Flight characteristics goes a long way. Lack of sound goes a long way. If you see a light in the sky and it's making 90-degree turns without slowing down, that's anomalous. If you are seeing a light in the sky and there's no sound, there's no effect of the environment, there's no trees or leaves being blown by the engines, that's anomalous. Are there EMPs? Is your car radio being disturbed? Is your cell phone malfunctioning? Is there an effect on electronics? That is anomalous. So there are certain things you can look at that might lead you to something being a little more out there, pardon the pun. But there certainly are things that can also lead you to the idea that this is simply a misidentification, whether it was a star or birds or weather balloon or a helicopter. So
when we think about that, if somebody has seen something which they consider to be unusual or made contact with something, that a creature of some type that they consider to be bizarre or disturbing, how would they deal with that subsequently? I mean, would they contact you? Would they contact another organization? What would you suggest?
Well, the Mutual UFO Network is in operation here in the States, and they have chapters in other countries also. So if a witness is lucky enough to be in a city that has a local chapter, I would go that avenue. They have their national website too. Then there's the National UFO Reporting Center run by Peter Davenport. That's another option. And then there's individuals like myself that work independently. If they can find us, whether on Facebook or other social media platforms or on internet websites. So there's options out there. And it's best for a witness to try to seek that help out as quickly as possible. Not only chronicling things, but finding someone to look into this stuff as quickly as possible, as soon as possible, is a big deal too. So there are avenues out there. And the internet certainly has helped that along because, we're all interconnected so much more than we were, say, 40 years ago. So it's much easier to find someone to take a look at this stuff than it was, say, in 1975.
Very good. What I want to do now, if I may, is talk to you about a couple of the personalities and then talk about potential alien species. One of the individuals who I know was Travis Walton. Travis Walton, for those people who don't know, in synopsis, he claimed to have had an encounter with an alien species in Arizona in the early 1970s. He said he had a craft abduct him. He was in on that craft for several days. People passed polygraphs who were connected with him. And he talks very lucidly about the different alien species he encountered, both grey aliens and a sort of blonde Hyperion-type creature, from my recollection. You must have studied his accounts. Because I've met him on a personal basis, I had lunch with him and listened to his accounts. I was interested in what you thought of him, William. Do you find him to be credible or not credible? What do you think?
I find him credible. I've met him several times over the years at Roswell during the UFO Festival every July, and I find him credible. His accounts of what transpired. Again, I'm not there to witness his events. I'm firmly in the camp that there was a multiple witness sighting when he was there, when he was being transported with his fellow loggers away from their work site, when they all came across this UFO. As to what transpired after that, it's more speculative. It's got high strangeness to it. It's an abduction case that is a landmark case in the UFO literature. At this point, and my mind hasn't changed, I'm still a believer in the reality of that event. There's a couple of red flags. Like he didn't pass his first polygraph, but he's passed every polygraph since then. There were chemical changes in his body that did not show up that one would expect after being gone 5 days. But having said that, there's no evidence of hoaxing either. There's no evidence he lied about anything that he's given testimony about. So I find him credible, and I find that one of the landmark abduction cases that I think is describing exactly what happened. He's being honest and truthful, and I believe him.
And the other people around him, what was interesting was polygraphs are not definitive. You can be trained to pass them, and also psychopaths can pass them. But 5 other people, I think, to the best of my recollection, also passed a polygraph in relation to that. Now, to have them all pass polygraphs like that would be fairly unusual. So I was interested.
Yeah, it would be good.
I mean, I worked as a sort of lawyer for the British government, and I cross-examined people in court, and I applied the techniques I used on him when I spent some time with him. He didn't know I was doing it. I don't do it all the time because it's exhausting. But I wanted to find out whether he was telling the truth or not. And, I'm sure he is. He's either completely deluded or he's telling the truth. What he isn't is a liar. And I was pleasantly surprised about that. I mean, I think about that every day very respectfully, because his story, I thought, my goodness, this man's telling the truth. That's hugely significant. And I was fascinated. I was fascinated by it because it's profoundly significant, because he was telling the truth. He was. And I really scrutinised him. He didn't know. It's very subtle, but I did, because I wanted to know for my own self. Okay, that's good. Now, I've never met this gentleman, but he's become almost like the pin-up boy of ufology recently. And I don't mean that flippantly, but he's got his own film. I've seen him there, and he seems... Bob Lazar. Can you tell us a little bit about Bob Lazar and what your analysis of him is?
Bob Lazar is a scientist that alleges he worked at Area 51. His story broke at the tail end of the 1980s through the investigative efforts of George Knapp, who works for a local, I think it's an ABC affiliate in Las Vegas. And his story basically, in a very general way, is that he worked at Area 51. He worked with a element called Element 115 and worked on alien technology, alien spacecraft, recovered spacecraft, not spacecraft that are designed from alien designs made by humans. He worked on spacecraft constructed off Earth. And that story has generally not really changed too much since then. There's been a documentary done, and interestingly enough, he kind of disappeared for the UFO community for quite a number of years. After this story broke, he was prominent in the community, and then kind of faded away, went away, and then he resurfaced recently. And you're right. He's I hate to use the term. He's kind of a poster boy for the UFO community, somewhat. That story is known by people outside the community. It's almost like Roswell. It's very well known by you could say the average American has some idea of who this person is. So that speaks volumes about the story.
Now, when we look at that, when we look at Bob Lazar, and obviously you've watched his videos, and I have too, because I was very interested in his story. What's your assessment of his story?
I don't know. I apologize. That's the second time I've said that tonight, but
no, it's
I don't
cool.
know.
I didn't mind you saying I don't know. Well, I'm completely good with I don't know. What I don't like is people who make things up because they don't know. You know what I mean? Don't know is great.
That does happen. No, there are some red flags with his story. His educational background has not really held up under scrutiny. There's questions he doesn't really consistently answer, if at all, which is troubling, but that doesn't mean he's lying either. So, and a lack of physical evidence. We need some documentation. We need more than just one person telling the story. It's basically, it equates to a single witness UFO case. It may be valid, but with nothing more than just one person's testimony, it can be difficult to really definitively prove it. I don't know what to think of the story. I don't have a position. I don't know if I believe him or not. There's red flags both ways. I've just never made my mind. I've never declared a position as far as if Lazar is telling the truth or not. So, will evidence or data come to light in the future to confirm his story or debunk it? I don't know. We'll see. But I have no idea whatsoever.
I want to just pause and look at two pieces of evidence with Lazar. One which works against him and one which works in favour of him, if my recollection is correct. So the one that works against him, which you talked about, was his potential qualified. I think he said he had a degree or something, a master's or something from MIT, and he didn't. There's no record of it. So that works against it. This is the best of my knowledge. Yeah. Forgive me if I'm not correct. But the thing that I thought was interesting, and if this is true, then I thought was especially interesting, was that at first the government denied that he'd ever worked in anything connected with Area 51 in any way. And then it may have been George Norrie, I don't know, but somebody discovered his phone number on the base, his actual phone number. Is that right?
I've heard that in passing. I don't know if that story is true or not, but I've heard that consistently for several decades since that story broke. That certainly would be confirmation that he worked at Area 51. It may not confirm that he worked on the alien spacecraft. It may have been just he could be a custodian for all we know. But if that story is true, if his number was recovered somewhere on the base, then that at least does confirm he was an employee. As to what position, we don't know. But I tend to think you're right. There is evidence that leads to both sides. There's evidence that tends to confirm his story, and there's evidence that tends to debunk it also. So it's a difficult story to even take a position on.
Yeah, I think I'd like to meet him and chew on his story a bit in person. Travis Walton, really, I mean, in a good way, that really surprised me, and it sort of confirmed a few things. So that was very interesting. Good.
Travis is a true gentleman. He's very easy to talk to. So.
Yeah, he's solid in his story, and it impressed me. I've thought about it a lot since. It was very changing for me.
Yeah.
When we talk about, I just want to talk a little bit about potential alien species which which are visiting. I mean, you said right at the end of right at the beginning of the interview that this person made an assertion about all these various species, but a few consistently come up. The greys are obviously, these grey aliens are obviously very much embedded in the public consciousness right now. They're almost,
yes,
you see them almost as much as Mickey Mouse. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just that again, they become part of pop culture. You have these Nordics and blondes. What sort of creatures do you consider to be? I know this is all speculation, William, so I am expecting you to count you in that terms. But what sort of creatures do you think are the more possible ones that are actually visiting us, and why?
Well, if you just go by the data, that's the way I do things in this field. The greys, whether they're organic or they are manufactured, appear in a lot of the UFO cases, not just abductions. Cases where UFO occupants are sighted. This spindly gray alien with almond-shaped black eyes, large head, no opposable thumbs, no sexual organs, hardly any ears. That description is relatively common. So I'm comfortable with the potentialities of that species. The Nordics, same thing. The Nordics are reported pretty often, and it's funny that some UFO occupants are more commonly reported depending on where you live in the world. I mean, the greys are common to North America and Europe. The Nordics are far more common in Europe. Although they're reported in the States also. Occupants that are reported south of the border tend to be shorter, more like gnomes. They're hairy and aggressive. So that's an interesting problem I've never really been able to wrap my head around why that is. But there seems to be 3 or 4 different forms beyond the greys and the Nordics. Insectoids are mentioned. Reptilians are mentioned. 3 or 4 different styles, types, descriptions that are extremely prevalent, common in occupant cases. So I'm not comfortable with 40, 50, or 60 species visiting Earth.
Yeah.
But I'm a little more comfortable with maybe 3 or 4 different types. Because, again, people are describing these things. They're kind of interpreting things in their own way. So slight differences in descriptions maybe just be a personal thing. They're describing the same thing, but just in their own way. I guess 3 or 4 is a short answer.
And so the 3 or 4. I mean, I'm not trying to pin you down. It's just I'm genuinely interested for my own understanding. So you'd say greys, Nordics, reptilians, and insectoids. Maybe these other hairier southern creatures.
Yeah, some along all those lines. I mean, back in the 50s and 60s, there were a lot of robots being reported. There were a lot of forms that seemed to be mechanical in nature. Those sightings have kind of gone by the wayside. Those don't come up anymore. Now it's virtually all greys, Nordics, that sort of thing. So as to what it is, I don't know. Maybe we'll never know. But the data seems to suggest that there's just a small number of species that can account for virtually all the UFO occupant cases. The ones that aren't, the ones that are seem to be more valid, more grounded. It's not a high number.
Good. So when we think about them, I mean, and you must have considered this. And again, I know I'm asking you to speculate, but I'm asking you to speculate using your approach based on the quantification of data that you have professed. What do they want? These creatures, do you think?
I have discussed that with many friends in the field, and I don't know. I mean, I'm under the impression that they may have discovered this purely by accident. If they're an advanced species, or there are several of them, we can safely assume that they have been exploring the universe, or they may have been just traveling to some other star or some other destination. They came across us. They came across our radio signals. They might have intercepted I Love Lucy or Jeopardy, and they determined that there's a intelligent species on that planet, and they decided to go visit us and do some exploring. So as to why they would be here, I don't know. There's as far as materials and resources, there's nothing here on this planet they couldn't get anywhere else in the universe. Nickel, iron, gold, platinum, oxygen, water. Those are all elements that are available everywhere. So from that point of view, Earth is not unique. Now, if intelligent life is relatively rare, they may be coming here for us, to examine us, to learn about us. So,
yeah.
But that's about the only reason I could think of that they would actually come here from where they're coming from. I don't know. It's pure speculation, but that's my gut feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very careful to quantify it in sort of way. I mean, one of the things that, you know, when you think about people who've been allegedly abducted, and you've obviously spoken to some, do they suggest any motivation? Are they here for our DNA, or are they here to culturally absorb? Because it seems to me, I agree with you, that the natural resources we now know that they're very plentiful. So the main reason would seem to be us. And if it's us, for what purpose? Have you had any gleaning from any of the people you've spoken to about that?
No, I've spoken to over, I guess, let's say probably over 200
yes.
alleged abductees here in South Texas. And I can't recall a single one that actually declared they have an idea of why they're here or what's going on. They all seem lost. They all seem blissfully unaware about the motivations why they're being abducted, why they're here, why what is going on is going on. So I've gathered no data or any kind of idea about what might be the motivations from the witnesses. The witnesses seem all in the dark. They seem in the dark. They have no idea why what happened to them happened, why they were taken, why there's any interest in them. So the data doesn't lead us anywhere. It's just kind of still. It's a pure enigma. It's a total mystery.
One of the points I've seen from some of the theoretical physicists and scientists recently is that our planet may be some sort of prison planet, maybe in isolation, that would explain things like the Fermi paradox, where are all the aliens? Do you consider that to be a reasonable hypothesis? Could we be in isolation while these other creatures observe us, or is that nonsense? What do you say about that, William?
I think it's nonsense. I mean, and if it isn't, I don't know how we go about proving that. I don't know what evidence would come to light to definitively enable us to say that's reality. That's actually what's happening. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't know how you would prove it, but I don't buy the idea whatsoever. I think we're just a naturally occurring system in the universe, and they may have accidentally come across us, and maybe they're just exploring us to gain some knowledge about our civilization and ourselves at our point in evolution, and maybe that. I don't think there's anything more to that. It makes for fascinating conversation, though, and there's always possibilities. But I don't agree with that idea at all.
No, I think it's a philosophical point. I think, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, I wanted to make sure I asked you during our hour, is there's been a lot of talk about traveling through space and, how we would get past things like the speed of light, and then talking about warping space. But also, I've noticed that physics has moved and it's certainly become more amenable to the idea of dimension and interdimensional travel. When you talked about, for example, parallel worlds, parallel universes, and you had tried to be a physics undergraduate 20 years ago, that would have been the equivalent of witchcraft in medieval times, I think.
Yes,
but these days, it's accepted, which is encouraging. So the question would be for you as a scientist in terms of your degree, which is more plausible, interdimensional, these creatures being interdimensional entities from different worlds where they can almost step through the dimensions, because we can't, as you know, we can't perceive all the dimensions that are around us. Could they be from these places, or could they simply be creatures from Zeta Reticuli, like the Greys? What do you say about that?
Well, theoretical physicists have pretty definitively proven that there are other dimensions in existence.
Yeah.
Not just in our universe, but there may be multi-universes. There are other planes of existence out there. Could extraterrestrials, I guess, non-terrestrial entities be traveling from some other dimension to visit us here for whatever motivation? I'm not overly uncomfortable with that. I could rationalize that. Yeah, that's a possibility, because again, we're basing our beliefs on the knowledge we have now at this point in 2020 AD. In 1,000 years, we may have the answer. In 100 years, we might have the answer. We're trying to rationalize and figure things out with the amount of knowledge we have at this point in time. As our knowledge increases, as we continue to evolve and move forward as a species, we might get these answers. So interdimensional, I'm not too uncomfortable with that. The extraterrestrial, there needs to be things answered to make that theory hold some water. Like, how do you defeat the light barrier? How do you travel from so far away to get to here? But again, I'm more comfortable with that, the extraterrestrial theory. I'm more comfortable with that because I think we don't know all the laws of physics at this point. We don't have that kind of scientific knowledge. They may have it. They may be able to. They may have discovered a workaround. So, but I would not discount the interdimensional.
No, I wouldn't. I always remember with the history of science. I remember a Victorian scientist, his name escapes me, but he basically declared, in the 19th century, that science had done all we needed, and all the discoveries that were going to be made had already been made. And that's obviously nonsense. Yeah. So, one last point on this subject, because it comes up a lot, is that people have speculated. I've seen it quite a lot, so I'm going to put it here, that things like the Greys, the Zeta Reticuli, could be us from the future. What do you say about that? We're clearly, at this point in time, becoming more reliant on our technology. We have cell phones, we have TV remotes, we have cars that drive themselves, GPS. We have all this technology that makes it easy for us to exist. We're less physically inclined to do things on our own. We let our robots do it. We let our controllers do it. And the end result of that might be we might be evolving into a less physically powerful species. We're becoming less physical, more mental, more brain power than physical muscle power. Could that end up with us evolving into a species that looks more like the Gray? I could see that. But I think my own take is it's interesting that the Betty Barney Hill case from November of 1961, the Greys they described were a little different. They had opposable thumbs. They wore clothes. They had pupils in their eyes. They seemed much more like organic creatures. The Greys we would see now seem more robotic. They're cold. They're clinical, emotionless. I don't know what to really think about that. It's again, like everything else in this issue, it's fascinating to think about. But that is a possibility. But we would have to explain how they travel back in time, and it would almost,
that's something. Yes, science can't define it yet.
Yeah, the point I'm going to make is it's almost like the Eloy and Morlock, H.G. Wells' thing with. We don't want to be perpetual Eloys, those beautiful but stupid, nor do we want to have the ugly technology of the Morlocks. So maybe that's a warning from history. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're pretty much at the end of the show, William. I've enjoyed it enormously. It's been an intellectual journey around the subject of ufology, and I've enjoyed your answers to questions I had myself and questions Mike had also. So I'd like to say thank you ever so much for joining us tonight. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. It's a great opportunity. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, and Mike's pleasure too. He just sent me a message saying how much he enjoyed it. So thank you ever so much, and we may well pick your brains in the future if we need some critical thinking in relation to this subject. So I'm sure you'll be hearing from us again. Thank you ever so much, William. Good night.
You're very welcome, Adam. I'm at your service.
Thank you, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, that was William Pullin. That was a very excellent and intellectual approach to the subject of UFOlogy. Next week, Mike and I will be back with Mark DeWorth. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good night.